Scripture reading this morning is taken from Genesis chapter 45, 3 through 8, and also Genesis 50, 15 through 20. This particular section is just as Joseph is revealing himself to his brothers after he's been away from them so long and went into captivity and then became second only to Pharaoh. But he has just revealed himself to his brothers at this time. And Joseph said unto his brother, I am Joseph. Doth my father yet live? And his brethren could not answer him, for they were troubled at his presence. And Joseph said unto his brethren, Come near to me, I pray you. And they came near. And he said, I am Joseph your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. Now therefore, be not grieved nor angry with yourselves, that you sold me hither, for God did send me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years hath the famine been in the land, and yet there are 5 years in which there shall neither be earing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve you a posterity in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you that sent me hither, but God, and he hath made me a father to Pharaoh, and Lord of his house, and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. Genesis 50, 15 through 20. And when Joseph's brethren saw that their father was dead, they said, Joseph will peradventure hate us, and will certainly requite us all the evil which we did unto him. And they sent a messenger unto Joseph, saying, Thy father did command before he died, saying, So shall you say unto Joseph, Forgive, I pray thee now, the trespasses of thy brethren, and their sin, for they did unto thee evil, and now we pray thee, forgive the trespass of the servants of the God of thy father. And Joseph wept when they spake unto him. And his brethren also went and fell down before his face. And they said, Behold, we be thy servants. And Joseph said unto them, Fear not, for I am in the place of God. But for you, your thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to bring to pass, as it is unto this day, to save much people alive.
I know that I can't get a lot of sympathy from people today because a lot of you've got the same thing. And just a quick update, not to bore you with everything, but I felt responsible about carrying on my duties. Part of my duties is preaching. And I went to the doctor again yesterday up here, and I prayed as I was waiting for her to come in that they'd give me something, because a lot of times you visit and they don't give you anything. And she came in and she said, I bet you're drowning at night. Because she knew what was wrong with me. I said, yes, I am. She says, I got the same thing. And so that helped because she gave me something. I got another Rocephin shot and another steroid shot and an inhaler, and which is, I think, helping, another antibiotic, and some cough syrup and such like. I make it fine usually during the day. It's at night, and I've been really paying for it for about the last week or so. And so anyway, I feel better. I'm really tanked up on cough drops and Chloraseptic and cough syrup. And I probably overdosed on the cough drops, but I found some that work really well. Usually cough drops, no matter whether they're Ricola or anything else, don't work real good for me, but the Chloraseptic cough drops do, because it helps deaden this. And then I might as well tell you about the rest of my week and kind of warm my voice up, because I haven't talked a whole lot. But since Randy was going to tell you, and I don't think he did, I told him, you don't have to say that, I'll confess. He's not here. He wouldn't know if I confessed or not, but I will confess. My week hasn't been really good. This is my klutz week. I am a klutz. Years ago, when I worked at Fred's Dollar Store, we had a lady named Dora, I think was her name, that worked there. And she was fond of saying, when I lived in Osceola, Bill, you can't walk and chew gum at the same time. And I got a lot of things I could say about that. It's not maybe as true as it used to be, but every once in a while it comes and visits me. I know, I think it was Sunday night, I was getting my favorite after meal dessert, which is anymore because it doesn't have a lot of calories and such like, or there's some things I could eat. I've been getting graham crackers and milk. That's pretty good. I like that. It's cheap. Generic graham crackers are as good as the name brand, and sometimes better. And I like chocolate and honey graham crackers, and so I sometimes mix them. We have both of them. But I went and was going to set my little cup of milk on the coaster. Missed the coaster, went from the coaster to the floor, on the couch. I don't know that a glass this big should hold so much milk, but it did. My wife was sitting on the other end of the couch and gave me one of those looks, Mister, this is your mess, you clean it up. And sometimes she gets up and helps me, but that was kind of look that she gave me. So I went and grabbed a roll of paper towels and the kitchen towel and had to do that. Got that done. Well, the rest of the week went pretty good. Got out here Thursday morning, went to the men's restroom back here in the back. One of the reasons was, Johnny and them were cleaning up around here, and so I didn't blame it on them anyway, but they were cleaning, so I went back there. Another reason, got back there and the heat was on. These bathrooms are getting cold. This building's not heated up generally except, 2 days right when the heat comes on. And so I went back there as well, and the commode didn't flush real good, and I thought, I'll check this out. So I had the lid and took the lid off, was putting the lid up, and it literally slipped out of my hand. And I looked down and saw pieces laying on the floor, and I thought, wonder where that's from. Lid looked all right. Looked down and the commode was broke. So I broke the commode. I don't know if the elders are going to hold it out of my check or not. I told Johnny they could. They just kind of say, well, they're going to hold it over my head, and I believe they'll do that. I found out a real interesting thing, though. I called Chip about it before the day was out. All 3 elders knew about it. I had told Johnny, I confessed right up, but I think the other 2 found out through various ways. Thank you, Chip, for that.
Too good to keep.
Too good to keep. And so I decided I'd share that news with you. That's why the commode is probably sitting outside and the boxes in the floor in there, but we have a brand new high-rise commode. Dwayne said he'd been wanting one back there anyway, so there's bright things. People have been giving me all sorts of formulas, all sorts of home remedies to use, and also diagnosis. I do have acid reflux. I've had that for a long time, but that's not what's wrong with me. Upper respiratory is what the doctor said. Some people have said I had nodules on my throat. If it doesn't get well, I'll go see the ear, nose, and throat doctor and have him look down there and tell me what's on there. And maybe a thing to do when you make your living by your throat, partly. You got to take care of that. And then the other remedy that somebody said is salt water. So I thought, well, I'll do that today. I'll pull out all stops. You ever tried to gargle salt water when you had a gag reflex? It went all over the mirror, all over me. So I cleaned the floor up and myself up, cleaned the mirror up. That was after I ate a biscuit and forgot it was in the paper towel and went to throw it away, and the biscuit was all over the floor. But that's just my morning. You want to know what else is worse? And then I'll shut up because my voice is getting warmed up. I went and bought me Chloraseptic, and I sprayed it. I had another little reflex, and it landed on my tie. That's not why I'm wearing it. It dried, landed on my shirt, but I'm fine. So I'm going to preach until I fall down.
You ever try honey?
I hadn't tried honey, but I hear that's good too.
It's Coach and Susan. You might try that one.
I think Robitussin has a new cough syrup that has honey in it, and they say the honey's real. It has a bear at the window giving it to this lady and says the honey's real, the bear's not. And I thought, I think we could tell that, but anyway.
Yeah, I work with, he's got acid reflux too. He'll take a little teaspoon of honey and swallow it, and it takes care of it.
It may have to work.
And I've seen him do it, and I had acid reflux. I tried it myself, it worked too.
Okay.
And it just worked.
Well, we're here in Genesis, and God was with him, a study of Joseph. I did something a little different that you'll see in this lesson. I put a lot of pictures in, and if I had just have to refer to the pictures, you can read the book of Genesis. The life of Joseph is really one of the really outstanding lives that you read about in the Bible. And a lot of times when it comes to providence and the providence of God, we don't understand that. We don't understand sometimes why things happen in life the way they do. Sometimes we go through really bad things in life and we don't understand it. And we are hopefully, at least for what we can be, almost over the chemotherapy. Our Inez is, she has treatment Tuesday and she has supposed to have one more after that. And we hope this is it. We'll talk to the doctor about further treatments, but we hope there is none. And we hope that the scan shows she's still in remission, and we hopefully will remain in remission. But that added a new chapter in our life. We can tell you, all honesty, we've been making it very, very good. Financially, we haven't been burdened because of this is circumstances in life we were in. The insurance that we sometimes gripe about paying is rather good insurance. And even though it didn't pay for the year's worth of treatments Inez has had, there is a foundation that has paid and picked up all of it. And that's foundation to the people that make the medicine. And so, again, out of bad things, we've been taken care of. We can see that. And it made us trust more in the day-by-day blessings of God and realizing that our lives are truly in his hands. There's been times in life that we struggle with family, we struggle with finances, we struggle with jobs, we struggle with a lot of things. And we honestly don't know why things happen the way they do. But generally, if we live long enough, we understand and we figure it out. In Romans 8:28, a verse that I really believe in, and we know that all things work together for good to those who love God and to those who are called according to his purpose. We may not understand all of that verse. A lot of people says, well, how can all things work together for good? Well, it says it does if you love God and if you are called according to his purpose. Now, his purpose is for us to obey the gospel and live for him. And then someone said, well, how do all things work together for good? One belief is, and I think probably the overriding teaching of the verse is, that all things work together in God's care, in God's spirit. He's going to make everything work. Whether it's that or things work good in our lives, I do not know. But God's going to take care of us. He's going to bless us. And in this lesson, I hope to strengthen our faith by seeing how God worked in the life of the patriarch Joseph to bring about good despite the difficulties Joseph faced. If you haven't read the story of Joseph lately, you need to. I couldn't sleep, woke up about 4 o'clock, probably because of the steroid shot they gave me yesterday. And I thought, well, I'll just study my sermon again. So I did. And that didn't put me back to sleep. And I thought, well, I'll read about the life of Joseph again, because there were some things in this lesson that was kind of foggy. I found that out when I got it together. And I thought, well, I'll just read. Fill in some of the blanks. You start about Genesis 36, and you go through the end of Genesis. And you read pretty well about the life of Joseph. He is almost the central character of those chapters. And he lived a illustrious life, but a life full of difficulties. God was with Joseph, and that's the thing. God was with Joseph in his struggles as a young man. Genesis 37. You begin reading the account of Joseph, and you find that he is the son of Rachel. He is probably the last sons, or among the last sons that Jacob will have. And he is loved more, and at least probably Benjamin may be loved more than the other sons that Jacob had. Joseph was his favorite. We all argue in the family about who's the favorite. Is it the oldest? Is it the youngest? Is it the middle? Is it daddy's girl or it's mama's boy? Who's the favorite? Well, there was no doubt in the life of Joseph and his family who the favorite was. Everybody knew who the favorite was, and it was Joseph. He was given a coat of many colors to wear. And as he wore that coat of many colors, that just cemented to the hatred that his brothers had for him. And so we see that. Joseph was a dreamer, and his dreams were not well received by his family. We read in Genesis, the 37th chapter, verses 5 through 7, where he had a dream that he was out in the field working one day, along with his brothers. And in the dream, Joseph said, "My sheaves stood straight up, but your sheaves bowed to me." Well, didn't like that dream very good. When he told him the interpretation of it, it was probably one that he should have just kept his mouth shut. But like us, sometimes we say things we might not ought to say. I confess to you all the things that I wanted to. If you want to get up here and confess all your things that you've done stupid this past week, you go right ahead. But anyway, he just had to tell the interpretation of the dream. And then he had another dream. We're familiar with it. Joseph saw a bright star right in the middle of it. And then he saw the sun and the moon and the other stars around it. And he had an interpretation of the dream. He went and told Daddy this one. And he told his brothers this one, and they didn't like it. "Are we going to bow down to you one of these days?" his daddy said. And his brother hated him. But it's interesting to note that the text says that Jacob, Israel, kept this saying to his heart. Joseph was hated. Joseph was hated by his brother so much, and that's what the text says, is that they hated him. His brothers wanted to kill him, but instead sold him into slavery. We know the story there. Joseph had been sent by Jacob to go check on his brothers that were out in the field. Joseph kept an eye on his brothers, and as we see from the earlier account that I didn't mention, there were times that Joseph went on and told on his brothers. I believe it was Bilhah and Zophor's sons that Jacob had looked and observed one day and went and told Daddy what they were doing. They didn't like that either. So he was a tattletale too. But when they seen him come, after he'd went through Shechem, they wasn't there. Asked, "Where are they?" And the man said, "Well, I think they moved over to Dothan." And when he was afar off and they recognized where he was coming from, they had this plan. Let's just kill him. Remember what Jesus said? If you hate your brother in your heart, you're guilty of murder. They were going to be guilty of murder. We know that Reuben the oldest came along and said, "Look, he's our brother. Let's don't kill him. Let's just throw him down in the pit." You read the text very carefully. It's indicated that sometime Reuben was going to come back and get him out and take care of him. He wasn't going to allow him to be put to death. Well, in the meantime, Reuben leaves, goes somewhere. That's again indicated in the text, as it indicated that along came the Ishmaelites. And that's what the one picture illustrates up there. The Ishmaelites are coming. And so the brothers of Jesus, Joseph said, well, let's don't kill them. Let's get them out and sell them. And they did. And it might have been a fate worse than death if God had intervened. Sold into slavery the rest of his life, at least for the good part of it. And then they had to tell Daddy something. Reuben came back, and Reuben, what have you done? And they told him. And the text may indicate he never fully knew. He just knew that Joseph wasn't in the well anymore. And so we know the story where they took the coat of many colors, put an animal's blood on it, took it back to Jacob and told Jacob or Israel, this is what we found. And so, because of their hatred, his brothers wanted to kill him, but instead sold him into slavery. And so I think that's important to understand. But I believe, and we know from the text, that God had other plans for him. Well, we look at the text in Genesis, the 39th chapter, and that should be 39 through 50. God is with Joseph in Egypt. But you look at 39 verses 1 through 4. It says, now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. You read in the rest of the verses, you know that he was given to Potiphar, who was an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites. God's providence, we think. And then you read in verse 2, a common text in the story of Joseph. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And then the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did prosper in his hand. And then, finally, Pharaoh made him overseer of all of his house and all that he put under his authority. Something he didn't have at home. Bought from slavery and restored to the head of an influential man in Potiphar's house. We think, well, the story is good, but you know the rest of the story of Joseph, that he was living the good life, but it would not last. Because Joseph was going to go from Potiphar's house to prison. The story is told in Genesis, the 39th chapter, verses 16 through 20. Joseph was a handsome man, both of physique and of looks. Text bears that out. He just didn't look pretty. His muscular physique was pretty. Miss Potiphar, we know as Potiphar's wife, lusted after Joseph. It happened every day for a period of time. Every day, she wanted to sleep with Joseph. Every day, I believe she tempted Joseph. Every day, she wanted to go to bed with Joseph. And one day, she decided, well, I'll just grab him and forcibly make him go to bed with me. And you know the story. Most men would have given in probably long before now. But Joseph didn't. He said, how can I sin against my wife? Against Potiphar's wife? How can I sin against my master who's been so good to me? And more than anything, how can I sin against God? And we know the rest of the story. And we know that she grabbed his coat and maybe his clothes, depending on what the text really means there, and he left them. And so she laid him out and she started crying. And the men of the house and the guards came. And she said, he tried to rape me. And when Potiphar got home, she said to him, what do you mean bringing this Hebrew dog, basically, is what I think she had in mind. What do you mean bringing this Hebrew scourge into my house? And even though it pained Potiphar, he had Joseph cast into prison. What else could he do? And so Joseph went from Potiphar's house to prison. Genesis, the 39th chapter, verses 21 and 23. Look at the underline. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy. And he gave him favor in sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever they did there, it was his doing. And the keeper of the prison did not look into anything that was under Joseph's authority. He let Joseph be. A lot of times when you're put into authority, somebody has to always look over your shoulder. If you ever worked for a manager that's been a micromanager, you were in authority of something, but they were always there, telling you how to do it or whatever. And that's the jailer said, he had confidence in Joseph. And he knew Joseph would do the job. But why? Because the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made to prosper. I want you to think about that as we think about the life of Joseph. Sold into slavery, God was with him. Went from Potiphar's house to prison, God was with him. And the story of Joseph continues. And we're going to look at it very quickly. Number one, while in prison, Joseph interpreted the dreams of the butler and the baker. Genesis chapter 40. We know that as he was having this dream, that they came to him. And the interpretation of the dream that the baker had, he had this dream about, he's carrying around baskets of bread on his head. And there were 3 of them. And then the birds come and eat what was in the top basket. Well, Joseph said, this is what's going to happen to you. 3 days. You can get out of here, but Pharaoh's going to kill you. 3 days came. He got out. He was hung for Pharaoh. I don't know if the chief butler or the cupbearer, as some translations said, wanted to tell Joseph his dream or not after that. But both dreams were told, probably before the interpretation was made. The cupbearer had a dream of a great vine growing, had 3 branches on it, had good grapes on it. And then he went and made wine, poured into the cup because he was the cupbearer of the king, and took it to Pharaoh. And Joseph said, your 3 days. After 3 days, you're going to be restored to Pharaoh's house. And we know the rest of the story. 3 days passed. Pharaoh came. He was restored to Pharaoh's house. And he promised to tell Joseph. He promised Joseph to tell Pharaoh about him. But if you read the text, he forgot him for 2 full years. 2 full years until Pharaoh dreamed his dream. We need to realize that being forgotten for 2 full years didn't mean that God forgot him. The text says the chief butler would admit, finally, that he had forgotten Joseph. He's told, I am going to admit my offenses. And he told Pharaoh, there's a young Hebrew man that was in the prison. And I think if you go get him, He'll be able to do what everybody else couldn't do and tell you what you saw. And we're familiar of the dreams that Pharaoh had of the cows that were come out of the water. 7 of them were healthy cows, 7 that were lean, and I think it was 7, and the lean cows ate the good cows and didn't gain any weight. And the sheaves of grain, the robust grain, they were devoured by the not so good grain. Not so good grain didn't change. 7 of them, by the way, wondered about that. Pharaoh was really upset. Couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, didn't know what was going on. And so he sent for Joseph. And so when Joseph successfully interpreted Pharaoh's dream, Joseph went from being a prisoner to royalty. Why? Because God still had plans for Joseph and was with him. I hope you appreciate going back over this story some. I've read it and tried to prepare well and remember the story of Joseph. And everywhere you look, he has diversity. He had things happen to him that we've not experienced. But God was still with him. And that made a difference. And we know, as Craig read this morning, and I'm not going to talk a lot about that, one of the things that Joseph said to his brothers after Jacob had died, and they were afraid, he's going to kill us. He's been waiting all this time, got us down here all this time. It's a very remarkable story about how they even got there, if you can go back and read that. But Joseph told them, it's not your fault. God had a plan. God had a plan for me. He had a plan for you. And we know from the rest of the story that Joseph took care of the Egyptians for 7 years. Very shrewd man, very shrewd businessman, and sending the grain back like he did and helping the people like he did. And putting his brothers where they were, the Israelites where he was. He used that, or God used that, for Joseph to fulfill what Pharaoh wanted him to do, and Egypt was well. And so we need to ask the question and hear some concluding thoughts about the life of Joseph and God's providential care. Number 1, God took the bad things that happened to Joseph and brought about good from them. Can anything happen good out of the bad things we suffer in life? They can. One of the things that I believe that we can tell in our journey with cancer, and that I had learned from my dad's journey of cancer, is that you can help people who've never been there before. You can learn. And you can help others who've never been there before. Inez has had such an outpouring of love and concern from those, many of you right in this congregation, that's been there and stood by her every day and still standing by her. My dad was that way. He wouldn't made a point telling everybody he had cancer. But I remember Art Smith telling me about an occasion that he would help and talk about his best attitude. I think of the attitude that Inez has had. And facing something like this, God was with him. He's with us. And we'll be there. God was with Joseph and made things work together for the good of his people. We may not understand why preachers leave sometimes. Sometimes they're asked to leave. Sometimes they leave on their own. And we may not understand it. A lot of times it's for the good, either in their lives or in God's life. That's what they see. That's what God's hand gives. The Lord's going to take care of his family. And the Lord's going to take care of his servants. God works well in the lives of people. And we need to remember and believe these two verses over and over again. Romans 8:28. And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God and to those who are called according to his purpose. It's just something we know because God said it. And then the verse that Paul gave in 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 7. For we walk by faith and not by sight. It's really important that we learn that in life. We may not see when we're faced with the problems of life that we're faced with. How in the world are we going to get through? How are we going to come up with money for treatment? How are we going to come up with losing a child? How are we going to come up with having estranged children? How are we going to come up with losing our job? What are we going to do? Whatever your circumstance is, if you're a Christian, walk by faith and not by sight. If Joseph had walked by sight in his life, he would have given up probably. Hated by my brothers, sold into slavery because they thought it was better than killing me, thrown into prison, forgotten, and yet he told his brothers on 2 occasions God had been with them. It was all a plan of God. It was in his will, and he took care of me. It's important that we learn that. Are you one of God's children today? I tell people every now and then that are not Christians, I say, you're going to be faced with the same things that other people face. You're going to be faced with the same hardships and the same sicknesses and the same problems. And some Christians don't understand, why are we going through the things we're going through? It's because I tell them, as a child of God, never forget that God will be with you no matter what. Look at the life of Joseph and learn from it. And have faith in God. Tonight, the Lord willing, we're going to talk about Paul's farewell message. It's the same farewell message I hope that we can share in our life when our life is over. May God help us to know that God will be with us like it was with Joseph of old. It's more than just a story we tell children. It's there for our learning. If you need to respond this morning, won't you come as we stand and sing?
He was saved.